Hello everybody, my name is Ian, and my video did not record any sound, so you're going to mismatch between what's on the screen and what you're hearing, but I'll be discussing the adjusting valve lash with a Mack AI 400 engine. And here you see me just introducing the engine, and I'm going to walk over and show you the tools we need, which would be a torque wrench, a set of feeler gauges already set or pulled out, the ones I need, which is intake, which is 0.016 inch, and then the exhaust 0.024, and then also a hex key to turn the adjusting screws and a bar to turn the engine over manually. Now, originally, if you don't have any markings on your vibration dampener up front for indicating which cylinder is where, you would go to the back of the flywheel and you locate top dead center for cylinder 1 at from the clutch mounting bolt holes, and for ease you transfer those markings to the vibration dampener up front. Right there is just the identifying marks on the engine, so in case you're confused about what specific engine you're working on, it has it right there, all the information you need, the serial number of the engine, and I believe that one also had the settings needed for the valve lash. Before I take anything apart or loosen anything, you go ahead and go through and check the clearance on the rocker arms. We're going to go ahead and say that these were misadjusted, so I loosened all the jam nuts, and I'm going to go ahead and loosen all the set screws. Now when I do start adjusting the valve lash for these cylinders, I'll be going in the firing order of the engine, which a 6-cylinder engine like this is 1, 5, 3, 6, 2, 4. That's not to be confused with what the companion cylinders are, which is 1, 6, 2, 5, 3, and 4. Very different things. Now here you see I've already turned the engine over, so I should be having that cylinder number 1 at top dead center. And that's just my cheat sheet. Write everything down beforehand so I don't have to stop in the middle of a project and look anything up. I wrote down all the torque specifications and the clearances for the valve lash. This is something that does need to be done according to a manufacturer service recommendation. It's needed to be adjusted correctly so the intake and exhaust operate on the proper amount of degrees off the cam lobe. And a note on this, when you do set these, you want to make sure you're actually on the base circle of the camshaft and not on part of the lobe. There you can see the rocker arms, and if you're ever confused on this engine, stamped inside it says intake and exhaust on which valve is which. The spring-loaded ones you see there are the exhaust, and the solid push rods are the intake. This may vary from engine to engine, so always double check. Now what I do there is on the spring-mounted ones, I get, as their exhaust, I use the 0.024 feeler gauge. Put pressure down on the spring to take up any slack there, and slowly turn the adjusting screw until you feel a slight drag from the feeler gauge. You should be able to move it with about, I want to say, 5 pounds of pull. And once you have that, you just tighten down the jam nut, double check it, and then torque down the jam nut. Now on this particular engine, I did not have the Mack service manual, but I went off of Pro Demand and it said the jam nut torque is 45 foot-pounds, but since this is a trainer, I went half torque. So I'll put it at 24. Torque it down. Obviously hear the click. Hear or feel the click of the torque wrench. And before you move on, you want to double check that. And if it is too tight or too loose on the feeler gauge there, you would loosen the jam nut and readjust as needed. And I believe, here's doing the intake, and I don't need to put any pressure down because there is no spring there, it's solid push rod. So you just tighten the jam nut, or I apologize, the set screw until the same thing. You get a slight drag, about 5 pounds on the feeler gauge, and then you torque down the jam nut and check it again. There are several different ways to adjust a valve lash as far as which cylinders in what order, but I went by the Pro Demand recommended way, which is you set cylinder 1, rotate the engine manually with the bar in the firing sequence. So that's the one I used. And like I said earlier, you want to be sure and very careful when you turn the vibration dampener or turn the engine manually to be accurate on this, because if you are off by 10 degrees, you'll have a badly running engine. If it's off by more than, I think, 12 degrees off the camshaft, your engine will just not run. So coming over to cylinder 5 and a little bit of a better view. And same thing, pressure down on the spring mounted push rod. Slight drag, have it set, and torque the jam down. Now this is a slightly longer video, but I wanted to do everything carefully, so I took my time with it, because if you misadjust these valves, you could damage push rod, rocker arm, the valves themselves, and that's always a very time consuming and expensive mistake. So be careful, do it right, and you wouldn't have that problem. And here I'm explaining the reason for the valve lash, which is as the metal engine heats up, obviously metal expands. So if you don't have that slight clearance for the rocker arm to the valves, you would either have it jammed all the way open, the valves or the rocker arms would be pushing on the valves and holding them open during any of the compression or power stroke of the cylinder. You can't just tighten them all the way down until it feels solid. Turn the engine over, and then just did cylinder 5, so I'll be moving on to cylinder 3. And when you turn these engines over, I believe I mentioned it, you don't want to use any electric motor to turn it over. You want to turn it over manually. So if you do make a mistake, or if there's a bind in the engine somewhere, you don't damage any components. There's a better view of turning over the engine, and like I said, there are markings on the front of the vibration dampener to align with the cylinders, and there's a little witness line on the block itself so I don't get lost. And here you just see me, can't hear it obviously, explaining the difference between companion cylinders and firing order. And when you do set these valves, or the valve lash, it doesn't require much to get that proper clearance. A little bit turn too much and it will be over tight, a little bit turn not enough, it'll be too loose, which could lead to poor performance and some engine noise. Slight drag, and move on to the intake. If by some chance when I am turning the bar over, you can see the rocker arms on the bridge go up and down as the push rods follow the lobes on the camshaft. I mean, if you are confused about if cylinder number 1 is at top dead center, turn it over and you should get to the point where the rocker arms on the push rod side are the lowest they can be. It's kind of hard to see, you have to feel it. But that means the lobes, or the push rods, are following the base circle of the camshaft and not on any part of the lobe. And turn the engine over to, I believe I'm doing cylinder 4 now. But usually engines will have location markings somewhere. Once again, either on the flywheel, which might be a little difficult to see, on the vibration dampener, or on the gear train itself, it might have witness marks. Once again, it just depends on the size, not the size, but the manufacturer of the engine. And as always, when you're doing this, for the settings, the torque, or the procedure for this, always go by manufacturer recommendations. Here, like I said, I did not have a Mack service manual. I went off a Pro Demand. Double checking it after torquing it and moving on to the intake. went ahead and adjusted all the valves. And I'll be turning over the engine manually at least 2 complete revolutions. Simulating 2 complete firing sequences of the engine itself, which is intake, compression, power, and exhaust. Just double checking if I can tell manually if anything binds up. I may have misadjusted something, or there may be a separate problem that I need to solve. And you might be able to see a little bit of the rocker arms moving up and down as I'm turning the crankshaft. Through gear assembly inside the engine, I'm also turning the camshaft. And as those cams rotate, the lobes push the push rods up and down, which move the rocker arms, which activate the valves. And go ahead and set the valve covers back on. Hand start the bolts. And most valve covers, at least on this Mack anyway, are made of aluminum, so you want to be careful not to over torque them or to torque them in the wrong pattern. Usually you start from the center outwards in a spiral pattern. But once again, manufacturer recommendations, and follow those. At this point, the valve cover torque will be 18 on those bolts. But once again, on a trainer, we're going half torque. I want to say before it ends, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good day.